Hello, welcome back to Learn Oikonomia. Today we are going to discuss dumping and anti-dumping policies. So before going to see what is anti-dumping policy, it's very important to understand what is called dumping. So dumping is something that will involve selling a particular item at a price that would be very much lower than the price it would be charging in the home market. So whenever we consider trade, we need to take into consideration two countries. One is the exporting nation, and the other one would be the importing nation. Whenever we consider the case of dumping would affect the importing nation in a negative manner, and it would be affecting the exporting nation in a positive manner. So we are talking about the sale of a product by the exporting nation in importing nation at a price that is lower than what is charged from the domestically producing industries or domestic producers which are there in the importing nation. So I'll give you an example here. Just talk about the case of India and China. Here we assume that China is exporting steel in India. So China exports steel to India, or India is actually importing steel from China. Here we are talking about the scenario where when it comes to Indian market, now we do have two commodities. Now we do have two types of steel. One, Indian steel. Indian steel means the steel that is being manufactured by Indian producers or Indian manufacturers. Secondly, we do have the steel imported from China. That is import from China. So these are the two types of steel that we are having in Indian market. Now we have to take into consideration the price of these two steel. Indian steel, let it be something that would involve a sale of 1 kg for 100 rupees. So Indian steel is rupees 100 per kg. So again, this is a hypothetical example. Just take it in that sense. That means for 1 kg Indian steel, it is only requiring 100 rupees to purchase it. But what will happen when you import Chinese steel? Chinese steel, the same you can get for rupees 75. Again, you will be getting Chinese steel for rupees 75 per kg. Indian steel you will be getting for rupees 100, and Chinese steel you will be getting for rupees 75. And in both the cases we are dealing with per kg steel scenario. So here we could find that the price of Indian steel is here more than the price of Chinese steel. So here we are considering the scenario of domestic market. That is, in domestic market of India, the price of Indian steel here is more than the price of Chinese steel. So what will happen here? People have a tendency to purchase cheap commodity, isn't it? Cheap in the sense, cheap with respect to price. So people would have a tendency to purchase that commodity with lesser price in the market. So both these are substitute commodities actually. Indian steel and the steel imported from China, these are substitutes. Both are substitutes. You can substitute one with the other. So since the price of Indian steel is much higher than price of Chinese steel would be capturing the market of India. So coming to market of India, China will get more market share, or Chinese steel captures more share. So that might create problems to Indian manufacturers. Indian manufacturers would be losing their market. They would be losing their market share. And here, remember, we are talking about the domestic economy of India. So Indian manufacturers would be losing market share when we consider Indian market. So they are losing the Indian market here, creating complications. So we could find that dumping, if it is uncontrollable, it will be definitely hurting the importing nation. Here, India is the importing nation. India is importing steel from China. So, this is the context of dumping scenario. And it is in this scenario that we have to talk about something called anti-dumping policies. So in such a scenario, what Indian government can do is that Indian government can take some anti-dumping policies in order to restrict China from importing, in order to restrict India from importing steel from China, or in order to restrict China from exporting steel to India. Okay, so this is the context here. When we consider the scenario of international trade, WTO, that is World Trade Organization, this has actually specifying certain conditions under which anti-dumping investigations are to end. So definitely WTO knows it very well that when we consider international trade, when every country goes for anti-dumping policies, it might be sometimes hampering international trade. And for the very same reason, WTO tells that you can take anti-dumping investigation, you can take anti-dumping policies if you see that dumped imports volume is something that is too large. But if dumped imports is having a lesser volume, or if the volume is negligible, or if the margin of dumping is small, then try not to impose anti-dumping policies. So whatever it is, and dumping is something that is creating harm to the importing nation. And for the very same reason, it's very, very important to take into consideration some anti-dumping measures if the effect of negative impact on the importing nation as a result of dumping is too severe. So with that, let me introduce you to some of the important anti-dumping policies. The first anti-dumping policy that we have here is the protection offered to the domestic industries. I was telling that whenever we consider dumping, dumping will be affecting the domestic industries or domestic producers. So we need to protect the domestic producers from the foreign imports, which are usually priced very less below the fair market value that is being there in the home market. So this is very much important in order to give the domestic producers some level playing field in the local business. So this is very, very important to have something called a healthy competition. With dumping, you will be having an unhealthy competition, but when you protect the domestic industries, it will be ensuring a healthy competition. Again, it's very, very important to have a limit to give this protection. It's not like you can give unlimited protection to the domestic industries. Again, WTO tells about the extent to which you can provide protection, at extent to which a particular government can provide protection to its domestic producers. Here also we have to take a restriction. Now, next is preventing undercutting. So dumping is creating undercutting of local business. It is affecting the market of local producers. The market of local producers would be affected badly as a result of dumping. So it's very, very important to take some anti-dumping duties to prevent such kind of a bad impact. So that would make the imported commodity expensive. In the earlier case, when we go for something called anti-dumping duties, it would make price of Chinese steel to increase. So this would make price of Chinese steel to be more than price of Indian steel. So people will definitely go for Indian steel because it's cheap. So how could we attain this? We were going for some anti-dumping duties. Now, WTO disciplines. Whenever we consider WTO, World Trade Organization, it imposes certain rules, guidelines, discipline, everything for anti-dumping actions. So as I was telling earlier, WTO deals with something called an anti-dumping agreement. So this agreement will deals with certain rules and regulation, and whenever a nation goes for anti-dumping measures, it needs to follow the anti-dumping agreement and the rules and regulation that is being specified by WTO should also be taken into consideration when it goes for anti-dumping agreement. And that is very, very important to ensure that you are having a healthy trade relation with your trade partner. Now, investigation process. This is very, very important because we might say that, okay, China is dumping steel into India. But in such a scenario, we need to conduct a detailed investigation. Why? Because we need to determine whether dumping is actually causing harm to Indian industry. If that is happening, you can definitely go for anti-dumping measure in a strict manner. This would actually include, when we consider investigation process, we need to take into consideration all the relevant economic factors which will be playing a role here. We need to understand how dumping is actually affecting all the relevant economic factors. Then only we can go for a decision whether to go for anti-dumping measure or not. Now, duration of measures. It's not like when you go for anti-dumping measure today, it would be having its effect forever. No. Anti-dumping measure will be having some expiry date. So we have to consider the expiry date of anti-dumping measure. So it would be mostly like 5 years. After 5 years, it won't be there anymore. You need to go for the extension or continuation kind of thing, or else you need to take into consideration imposing new anti-dumping measure. So you cannot continue with the existing anti-dumping measure even after 5 years unless and until the investigation shows that the measure is very, very important. Otherwise, it would be causing injury. So you need to prove that the measure should be continued. Otherwise, it would be injurious to the importing nation. So otherwise, after 5 years, the measure would get expired. Now, we need to go for something called lesser duty rule, which is another policy that is very much important to be considered. So the authorities would be imposing some duties. Here, we need to consider the margin of dumping. Margin of dumping just shows the extent of dumping. So the authorities would be imposing duties at the lower level than margin of dumping if this level is actually adequate to remove injury. So whenever we go for some anti-dumping policy in the form of lesser duty rules, the margin is very, very important to be taken into consideration. Now, so we could find that when it actually comes into the anti-dumping policies, it's very, very important to reduce conflict between trade partners. So you can go for a conflict-free trade, and better trade relation can also be ensured between trade partners if there is no dumping. But dumping, if it happens, we need to look onto the margin of dumping, the extent to which dumping happens, the extent to which dumping would affect the importing nation, and so on, and then only we can go for anti-dumping policies. So these kind of considerations are very, very important to be taken into account. Definitely dumping is bad, but we need to understand how much it is bad. This is the first thing to understand. And if it is too much bad, then only you can go for anti-dumping policies. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. You can like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more videos. You can join our free Telegram community. I'll be providing the link of the same in the description box. Also, if you're preparing for any of the competitive examinations in economics, you can be a part of Learn Oikonomia app. You can download it. You will be getting several previous year question papers, model answers, and also you will be getting several weekly tests with solutions and also some study materials here. That's it. Thank you for watching.